Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive into the stories that are really shaping our world right now. Today, we're cutting through, all the noise to get right to the core of some breaking news. The recent verdict in the federal trial involving Sean Combs. This is a moment that's really gripped national attention, sparking, well, intense debate and conversation everywhere. Our mission today is to thoroughly unpack the legal findings. We're talking about what happened down at the Southern District Federal Courthouse in Lower Manhattan. We'll dissect the immediate reactions, from inside and outside the courtroom, and think about the broader implications of this really complex outcome. It's a nuanced situation for sure. It vividly illustrates that critical difference between sort of public perception and the rigorous, very granular demands of criminal law. So, yeah, there's plenty to understand as we navigate through the legal side and the swirling public feeling around this pivotal moment.
Indeed. And this case has drawn just immense public interest, hasn't it? It's captivating national attention in a way few legal proceedings really manage to do. The jury's decision offers a fascinating, almost surgical look into the intricacies of legal distinctions versus that broad public perception. We'll explore not just the what of this verdict, but critically, the why behind this pivotal moment, sort of delving into how the jury meticulously weighed the evidence to reach a verdict that has undeniably surprised many and, well, probably solidified the views of others, too. The way the legal system processes these kinds of high-profile cases, especially when public opinion is so charged, it provides a rich and really essential ground for analysis.
The verdict delivered a nuanced outcome.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The headline, as we've learned, is that a partial verdict has been delivered in the federal trial involving Sean Combs. And it's a truly mixed message from the jury, which speaks volumes about the evidence presented, I think. Reports from inside the courthouse indicate that of the 5 charges brought against Combs by federal prosecutors, he was found not guilty on 3 of them.
3 out of 5.
Yeah. And these were described by, people close to the proceedings as the heavier counts, the ones carrying potential sentences ranging from, what, a minimum of 15 years up to even life in federal prison.
Wow. Yeah.
So this immediately sets a complex tone for the verdict, right? It's certainly not a clean sweep for either side. The sheer gravity of these particular charges and the potential life-altering consequences they carried really highlight the immense significance of the jury's decision on these specific counts. It just underscores the huge burden of proof the prosecution was facing.
And what's fascinating here is precisely how the jury specifically distinguished between the different allegations. Our information highlights that when it came to accusations of racketeering conspiracy, RICO and accusations of Smeg trafficking, the jury found him not guilty in both instances.
Both instances. So that covers Cassie Ventura and the Jane Doe.
Exactly. Pertaining to both, yes. This distinction is absolutely crucial. The jury was reportedly in unison on these counts, agreeing unanimously that he did not engage in racketeering or Smeg trafficking as defined by the law. It demonstrates a clear line drawn by the jury regarding those most severe allegations. And for a jury to unanimously decide on such heavy charges after, 8 grueling weeks of testimony?
8 weeks, yeah.
Where so many different people testified about so many things. Well, it speaks volumes about the evidence, or perhaps the perceived lack thereof, presented for those specific claims. They must have meticulously parsed through the various accusations, ensuring their findings reflected the specific elements of each charge, as presented in court, rather than just a generalized sense of culpability.
But on the other side of the ledger, like you said, it wasn't a complete exoneration by any means. Combs was found guilty on 2 lesser charges.
Right.
These convictions involved the transportation of individuals for the purpose of illicit SMEG-related acts, specifically under the Mann Act. So while maybe not the most severe charges initially brought, these still represent federal convictions with very real, significant penalties attached.
Definitely.
It really emphasizes that the jury wasn't just, dismissing all claims wholesale. They were making very fine-tuned, almost surgical decisions based on the specific evidence tied to each individual count. This isn't a sweeping judgment. It seems like a precise application of the law.
Yes, exactly. And these convictions specifically relate to his actions concerning both Cassie Ventura and the Jane Doe. Sources close to the trial confirm that for these Mann Act transportation charges, the jury agreed unequivocally that he did it in both cases, with both the Jane Doe and Cassie Ventura.
That specific phrasing, he did it in both cases. That's pretty direct.
Very direct. It really underscores the jury's certainty and consensus on these 2 counts. And while they're considered lesser in comparison to racketeering or Smeg trafficking, Each of these Mann Act transportation charges carries a maximum sentence of 10 years in federal prison.
10 years each.
Each. So, even though they aren't the potential life sentences that the other charges carried, 2 counts of up to 10 years each is still a truly substantial potential legal consequence.
Absolutely. 20 years max,
Yeah.
potentially.
Potentially. It's a clear signal that the jury found concrete, demonstrable evidence for these particular actions, differentiating them sharply from the broader, more complex allegations of Smeg trafficking or racketeering. They weren't just saying yes or no to everything. They were very specific in their findings, showing a deep and disciplined engagement with the material presented over the trial's duration.
So what this verdict powerfully illustrates then is that critical difference between public perception and the rigorous granular demands of criminal law.
Yeah.
The jury wasn't swayed by broad narratives, it seems. They were bound by the specific elements of each charge, meticulously sorting through the evidence to differentiate between what was proven and what was not.
Exactly.
That's the core takeaway here. A jury that clearly made very specific nuanced distinctions between the allegations, leading to this complex, partial verdict. It's definitely not a simple black and white outcome, which makes understanding the public and legal reactions all more critical, I think.
Courtroom and street immediate reactions.
So this jury's meticulous approach led to this complex result. But what happened the moment that verdict dropped? That's where it gets really interesting. The scene both inside and outside the Southern District Federal Courthouse in Lower Manhattan was immediate, palpable, and highly charged.
Oh, yeah.
Reports from the ground paint a vivid picture of the immediate aftermath, describing just a palpable tension and a flurry of activity that truly underscored the immense public and media interest in this case. It's not just a legal decision, is it? It's become a public event, a kind of cultural flashpoint that drew eyes from, well, all around the globe.
Absolutely. And from inside the courtroom, the immediate reaction from Combs' attorney, Mark Agnifilo, was described as incredibly forceful, swift. He wasted absolutely no time, reportedly arguing aggressively with the judge to allow Sean Combs to walk out right this second.
Right away.
Right away. This indicates an immediate and assertive push for his client's instantaneous release following the partial acquittal, especially given the not guilty verdicts on the most severe charges. Combs himself was observed reportedly telling his family, "I'll be home soon."
Wow.
A direct and maybe defiant message signaling his immediate expectation of freedom. This kind of immediate, fervent advocacy is, well, it's typical in high-profile cases where every second counts in shaping the narrative and the legal path forward. The mood, by some accounts, was one of sort of relieved defiance from his legal team, a sense that they'd won a significant battle.
And outside the courthouse, what was happening there? Reports describe a truly remarkable scene. Hundreds of people had gathered, a sprawling crowd that filled the streets around the courthouse.
Hundreds, wow.
Yeah, it wasn't just a few onlookers. It was a substantial vocal crowd, demonstrating a tremendous element of public interest surrounding this case. This isn't just about legal proceedings anymore, It's a cultural moment, almost a spectacle, drawing people to the streets to witness history, or what they felt was history, in the making.
Yeah.
The sheer volume of people speaks to the magnetic pull of these celebrity trials and the profound impact they have on the public imagination. It transcends mere legal curiosity, becoming this matter of widespread public engagement and collective anticipation.
The sheer intensity of that crowd is indeed notable. And it provides a fascinating barometer of public sentiment, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Sources mentioned they rarely see this intensity. They even drew a compelling comparison to the public turnout during the Trump trial in the very same location.
Really? Compared to the Trump trial?
Yeah, stating, "We didn't see this many regular citizens out here."
This particular detail truly emphasizes the unique nature of the public's engagement with the Combs trial.
People were literally lining the streets, pressing against barricades, trying to get a look, trying to be involved in the unfolding drama. This isn't just passive interest. It's an active desire to be physically present at a significant cultural and legal event. The comparison to another highly publicized trial in the same venue really puts into perspective the extraordinary level of public fascination this case has commanded. It highlights a deep societal investment in its outcome beyond just, casual observation.
This level of public interest, though, it must create significant logistical challenges, wouldn't you say? Especially for the people responsible for maintaining order and security around such a high-stakes environment.
Oh, absolutely.
It's one thing to have a big media presence, but hundreds of citizens actively gathering, fueled by strong emotions and a desire for immediate information, that adds an entirely different layer of complexity. And potential volatility, maybe?
Absolutely. This scenario poses a very interesting and substantial security issue for the U.S. Marshals, who are tasked with security over there at the Southern District Federal Courthouse. The sheer volume of people wanting to witness events firsthand, along with the numerous press outlets described as being here in duplicate or triplicate, with satellite trucks lining the streets, means the environment is highly charged and exceptionally difficult to manage.
Yeah, I can imagine.
For instance, specific journalists like Lisa Evers were inside covering the proceedings, giving real-time updates from within the courtroom, while Arthur Chen was outside reporting on the, well, chaotic and intense scene on the streets. This dual pervasive coverage highlights the immense media and public scrutiny this case has garnered, creating a dynamic and potentially volatile situation for security personnel.
Right.
The careful coordination required to manage both the media scrum and the large public gathering, while ensuring the safety and integrity of the court proceedings. It's a testament to the complex challenges posed by trials of this magnitude. Every aspect, from crowd control to maintaining clear pathways for legal teams and officials, becomes a monumental task. It demands constant vigilance and strategic deployment of resources.
Decoding the charges, what each verdict meant.
So let's dig into what this all means, legally speaking. The jury's decision to find Combs not guilty on the heavier counts, specifically racketeering, conspiracy, and Smeg trafficking, while convicting him on the Mann Act charges. That raises important questions about the specifics of the legal definitions at play, doesn't it?
It really does.
It forces us to consider how the legal system meticulously differentiates between various degrees of alleged misconduct, and how a jury, after weeks of intense deliberation, applies those distinctions to the evidence presented. This isn't about, like, general wrongdoing. It's about very specific legal thresholds being met or not met for each charge.
Exactly, and this raises an important point about the nature of these modern high-profile trials. The trial itself went into week number 8, right? Extending over a significant period, consuming countless hours of testimony and evidence presentation.
A marathon.
Definitely. And we heard that so many different people testified about so many things, building this, like, dense tapestry of information for the jury. The information coming in emphasizes that the jury, having seen and heard all this testimony, seems to have been very much in sync with their decision.
And sync, meaning they agreed strongly.
It indicates a strong level of agreement and cohesion among the jurors, suggesting they reached their conclusions methodically and collectively rather than with significant internal disagreement or, fighting about it. Their unanimity on specific counts, both guilty and not guilty, points to a clear and shared understanding of the evidence and the intricate legal instructions provided by the judge.
So it really appears they meticulously sorted through the evidence to differentiate, focusing on the precise elements of each charge rather than just broad strokes of accusation. This level of detail in their decision-making is what truly makes this a nuanced outcome, and it speaks to the rigorous demands placed upon a jury in these complex federal cases.
Precisely. And let's maybe delve into the specifics of those not guilty verdicts for a second.
Okay.
The racketeering conspiracy charge, RTO, it's a powerful federal tool, right? Designed to combat organized crime. To secure a RICO conviction, prosecutors have to prove the existence of an enterprise, basically a group associated for a common purpose and a pattern of racketeering activity. That means at least 2 specific criminal acts like extortion, bribery, or in this case, potentially Smeg trafficking, committed within a certain time frame.
Right, it's complex.
Very. The not guilty verdict on RICO implies that the prosecution failed to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, either the existence of such an enterprise or the pattern of racketeering activity as legally defined. Similarly, for the Smeg trafficking charges, the law typically requires proving someone recruited, harbored, transported, provided, or obtained another person for commercial Smeg acts, and crucially did so through force, fraud, or coercion.
Force, fraud, or coercion. That's the key part.
That's often the key and difficult part to prove. The not guilty verdicts on these heavier counts, the ones carrying 15 years to life, signify that the prosecution just didn't meet the high burden of proof for these specific, often hard-to-prove elements. So while testimony might have presented various scenarios, the prosecution didn't present enough compelling evidence Or maybe the defense successfully introduced sufficient doubt to convince the jury on those most severe allegations.
So a not guilty isn't necessarily innocent, but not proven.
Exactly. It's a statement about the burden of proof. It confirms that the threshold for conviction on those specific charges was not met in the jury's eyes, despite the length and depth of the trial.
Okay. And how does that contrast with the convictions then? Where did the jury find that the evidence did meet the required burden? What was the difference, do you think, in the evidence for those Mann Act counts?
Well, the guilty verdicts on the two Mann Act transportation charges demonstrate that the jury did find sufficient evidence to convict on those specific actions. The Mann Act, it's an old law, enacted back in 1910, broadly prohibiting transporting any woman or girl across state lines for the purpose of prostitution or debauchery or for any other immoral purpose.
Okay.
While these are considered lesser charges, maxing out at 10 years each, they're still significant federal felony convictions. The jury was clear in their determination, remember that quote. They agreed that he did it in both cases, with both the Jane Doe and Cassie Ventura when it came to transporting them for these purposes.
Right.
This indicates a critical distinction in the legal interpretation. It's about facilitating movement versus the broader, more encompassing elements of a systemic Smeg trafficking operation that requires proving that force, fraud, or coercion.
So the transport itself was proven, but maybe not the coercion aspect needed for trafficking.
That seems to be the implication. It suggests the evidence pointed directly and sufficiently to Combs' involvement in the specific act of moving individuals across state lines for these illicit purposes, even if the broader, more complex elements of Smeg trafficking or a RICO conspiracy weren't established to the jury's satisfaction. The specificity of their finding just underscores that the jury wasn't issuing some kind of blanket judgment. They were evaluating each charge individually based on the evidence they heard in court. They seemingly drew a line between maybe isolated or specific instances of transport for prostitution and the pattern of behavior, or the use of force, fraud, coercion required for the more severe charges.
Okay.
The jury's focus was clearly on the specific actions and intent related to transportation, where the evidence must have been compelling enough to overcome that high bar of reasonable doubt.
The ripple effect, public and commentary reactions.
So when a verdict like this comes down, especially in such a high-profile case involving someone as prominent as Sean Combs, well, the public reaction is rarely uniform, is it?
Hardly ever.
Given the intense crowds we just talked about outside the courthouse, it's clear people are already deeply invested in what this verdict means for, accountability and justice. How do our sources and just general commentary anticipate the public will receive this really complex, mixed outcome?
Well, reports from various media outlets and legal commentators explicitly predict that there are a lot of people who are going to have a reaction to this, which is putting it mildly, I think.
Yeah, probably an understatement.
Given the level of public fascination and, let's face it, pre-existing sentiment we've observed, and given the specifics of the verdict not guilty on heavy counts, guilty on the lesser Mann Act charges, you can absolutely anticipate a wide spectrum of responses. It'll range from, profound vindication to deep outrage and probably even genuine confusion for a lot of people. It's certainly not a simple case where everyone will just align on one side or the other. The nuances of the verdict will inevitably lead to fractured opinions and intensified debate across social media, among legal commentators, and within fan communities. The nature of public discourse in these cases means that pre-existing beliefs and expectations will heavily influence how this information is processed and interpreted by different groups.
So we might see everything from, profound vindication for those who've supported Combs all along, to deep outrage or confusion from those who felt the more severe allegations were credible and should have resulted in convictions on those heavier counts.
Exactly.
It sounds like this verdict could almost solidify existing divides rather than bridge them, highlighting that ongoing tension between legal outcomes and public expectations of morality and justice.
It's exactly right. Those who have supported Combs throughout this, or who were maybe skeptical of the more serious allegations from the start, they might very well feel a profound sense of vindication by the not guilty verdicts on the heavier charges, especially RICO and Smeg trafficking. For them, it could be seen as clear proof that the most damaging, reputation-shattering accusations were unfounded, or, at the very least, not proven in a court of law. They might see it as a win for the presumption of innocence.
Okay.
However, on the flip side, those who were closely following the extensive testimony over those 8 weeks, who perhaps heard compelling narratives from the prosecution's witnesses, and who expected convictions on the more severe charges, They could feel a profound sense of outrage, confusion, maybe even disillusionment by this mixed result.
Yeah.
They might feel that justice, in their eyes, wasn't fully served, or that the legal system somehow failed to capture the full scope of alleged misconduct they believe to be true. This divergence in public sentiment is precisely what makes such a complex verdict so impactful on the broader cultural conversation. It ensures that the debate around accountability and justice continues long after the jury leaves the room.
And many people are undoubtedly asking, and it's a very logical question for someone outside the legal world. How can he be found guilty of transporting someone for illicit Smeg-related acts under the Mann Act, but not guilty of conspiracy to do so, or of the broader charge of Smeg trafficking?
Right.
From a general public perspective, those distinctions can certainly seem contradictory, or at least highly perplexing.
That question gets to the absolute heart of the legal distinctions the jury had to make. And it starkly highlights the difference between a general public understanding of events, or maybe a holistic moral judgment, and the specific exacting requirements of criminal law. The jury's decision indicates they found the evidence sufficient for the specific act of transportation for illicit purposes, which primarily requires proving someone was moved across state lines for a particular unlawful intent. It's a very direct act-based charge.
Okay.
However, they did not find sufficient evidence to convict on the larger, more complex charges of Smeg trafficking or racketeering conspiracy. Smeg trafficking, as we discussed, typically requires proving those elements like force, fraud, or coercion, which can be really challenging to establish beyond a reasonable doubt, especially when interactions are complex. And RICO, racketeering conspiracy, requires proving an ongoing criminal enterprise and a pattern of multiple underlying criminal acts. The sources highlight that the jury heard it and they saw what was going on in that courtroom, suggesting their decision was based directly on the evidence presented to them under strict legal definitions, not external pressures, not public sentiment, not a holistic view of general culpability.
So they were following the judge's instructions to the letter, basically.
It seems so. They were constrained by the precise elements of each specific crime as defined by law, and the evidence that could definitively prove those elements beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a critical reminder that a not guilty verdict doesn't necessarily mean innocent in the colloquial or moral sense. It means the prosecution did not meet its exceptionally high burden of proof for that specific charge.
That's a key distinction.
Absolutely. The law operates with a very precise scalpel, while public opinion often uses a much broader brush,
What comes next, sentencing and future legal paths?
Okay, so with this complex partial verdict delivered, the focus now shifts dramatically, immediately to what happens next for Sean Combs. His attorney, as we heard, wasted no time pushing for his immediate release right there in the courtroom. That signals that the legal battle, even post-verdict, is far from over. This immediate and aggressive response kind of sets the tone for the next critical phase of this complex legal journey.
Indeed. We've heard directly from reports that his attorney, Mark Agnifilo, is actively and forcefully arguing with the judge to let Sean Combs walk out right this second. This is a forceful, immediate legal maneuver. They're leveraging the not guilty verdicts on the heavier counts, the ones that would have likely kept him in custody, to secure his client's immediate freedom.
It makes sense from their perspective.
Absolutely. This sets the stage for a critical phase regarding his immediate liberty, as the defense will surely press this point vigorously. They'll argue that with the most serious, potentially life-altering allegations dismissed by the jury, continued detention is just unwarranted. It's a highly aggressive posture, aimed at securing swift action and capitalizing on the momentum of the partial acquittal.
And what about the prosecution's stance on this, or their broader reaction to the verdict? Are we likely to hear from them, or will they maybe maintain a lower profile after such a mixed outcome? Securing some convictions, but losing on the biggest charges.
Yeah, their strategy moving forward will be quite telling, won't it?
It will.
Our sources indicate that it's highly unlikely the federal prosecutors will speak publicly in the immediate aftermath, particularly given that they lost in 3 out of the 5 counts, and notably, those were the heavier counts, the RICO and Smeg trafficking charges. Traditionally, the U.S. attorney might step out to address the press after a big verdict like this, but in this specific environment, and with such a mixed outcome where the most severe charges didn't land, well, they tend to prefer controlled environments.
Oh, okay. Not a scrum outside the courthouse.
Exactly. This suggests they might choose to issue a formal statement or perhaps hold a press conference at a different, more secure and regulated location, like 26 Federal Plaza, which apparently is only a 5-minute walk from where we stand right now, according to one source.
Interesting detail.
Yeah. This strategic silence allows them to regroup, assess the full implications of the partial verdict, and craft a more measured and cohesive public response without the immediate pressure and unpredictable nature of a street-side press conference, especially in such a charged atmosphere. It's a calculated move to manage perceptions and maintain control over their narrative following a, well, less than ideal result for their side on the most prominent charges.
So it sounds like the defense will be the ones setting the scene publicly then, leveraging the momentum of the not guilty verdicts to shape public perception and advocate strongly for their client's next step.
Yes, precisely.
They'll likely be the first and most vocal voices the public hears immediately following this verdict.
Yes, Combs' lawyers are fully expected to come out and speak publicly, and their immediate focus will likely be twofold. First, to emphasize the reasons whether he should be released immediately, building on the jury's rejection of the more serious charges. Second, they will likely begin to set the stage for why they should win on appeal, specifically addressing the two Mann Act convictions.
So they're already signaling an appeal on those guilty verdicts.
It confirms that despite the delivery of this verdict, the legal process for Sean Combs is by no means concluded. The defense will undoubtedly emphasize the jury's rejection of the most severe charges as a form of vindication, right? A clear statement that the most damaging allegations were not proven. Simultaneously, they'll be meticulously preparing for the appellate process for the two convictions, scrutinizing every aspect of the trial, from jury instructions to evidentiary rulings for potential grounds for appeal.
Right.
This public communication will be crucial in managing public perception and building a narrative that supports their ongoing legal strategy. It indicates that even after this significant moment, the legal journey continues.
Okay, so in terms of those two convictions, what's the next concrete step? While the defense is pushing for immediate release and planning appeals, the guilty verdicts on the transportation charges still stand. What does that mean for Combs' immediate future, separate from the dismissed charges? And what kind of potential penalties are we actually looking at?
Right. Well, a conviction under the Mann Act, specifically for transportation for illicit Smeg-related acts, is no small matter, even if they're labeled lesser compared to RICO or Smeg trafficking. As we noted, each of these two counts carries a maximum sentence of 10 years in federal prison.
10 years each.
The next critical phase will involve the sentencing process. This is a distinct and crucial legal proceeding where the judge will determine the actual penalty. This process isn't immediate, though. It typically involves a pre-sentencing investigation. Probation officers gather extensive information about the defendant, the crime, its impact.
Okay.
Both the prosecution and the defense will submit sentencing memoranda arguing for their preferred outcome. The judge will then consider the federal sentencing guidelines, which provide a framework based on offense, severity, and criminal history, though judges ultimately have discretion.
So the guidelines aren't mandatory.
Not strictly mandatory, but very influential. This process will determine whether Combs faces real prison time for these convictions, or if a different outcome, like probation or maybe a lighter sentence, is considered. The information we have points to the potential for significant prison time being very much on the table.
So this next phase could indeed be the final legal blow, leading to substantial incarceration. Or it could end up being more symbolic, depending on the judge's decision.
Exactly. And the arguments presented by both sides will be crucial. It's clear that the day is going to unfold in different places as these legal and public discussions continue. The sentencing phase represents another truly critical juncture in this complex, high-profile case. The legal saga definitely continues.
Audience reflection and final thoughts.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we've walked through the complex partial verdict in the Sean Combs trial. We've examined the fervent reactions from both inside and outside the courthouse and delved into the intricate legal nuances that led to this outcome in this very high-profile case. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it, that legal proceedings are rarely simple, especially when so much is at stake and public interest is, well, seemingly at an all-time high.
Absolutely. We've seen how a jury, after 8 grueling weeks of testimony and presumably careful deliberation, made very precise distinctions between different allegations. They ultimately found guilt on the charges of transportation for illicit Smeg-related acts under the Mann Act, but notably not on the heavier racketeering conspiracy or Smeg trafficking charges. Their apparent in-sync decisions underscore a deliberate, methodical process of evaluation based strictly on the evidence presented. It highlights the rigorous demands of proving specific criminal elements beyond a reasonable doubt in the federal court.
Right.
The specificity in their findings is perhaps the most defining characteristic of this verdict.
And this raises an important question for you, our listener, to consider as you process all this information. Given the detailed breakdown of the charges and the jury's unanimous findings on both the guilty and not guilty counts, what does this verdict say about the legal system's ability to delineate highly complex accusations with precision? Especially when you compare it to broader public sentiment or anticipation. Does this outcome reflect the legal system's fundamental design to find specific legal truth? Or maybe does it hint at the challenges in satisfying a public's desire for broader accountability that often transcends strict legal definitions?
Yeah, that's a great question. And moreover, as you reflect on the intense public interest described by our sources and the mixed feelings this verdict might evoke from, profound vindication for some to deep outrage and confusion for others, how might the concept of justice served differ? How does it differ between the specific legal outcome of a trial, which is bound by evidence and legal definitions, and the public's often more expansive and, let's face it, emotionally charged expectations of accountability, morality, and maybe even retribution? It's a powerful moment to consider the disconnects and perhaps the convergences that shape our understanding of justice in a world grappling with these complex, high-profile legal battles.
You've been listening to The Deep Dive. We hope this exploration has provided you with a clearer, perhaps more nuanced understanding of this unfolding story and maybe sparked further curiosity about how complex legal cases navigate that intersection of law, evidence, and public opinion.
We definitely encourage you to continue to mull over the complexities of legal verdicts and their broader impact on culture and justice, recognizing that every outcome carries multiple layers of interpretation and consequence, and that the conversation around accountability is certainly far from over.
Stay tuned for more deep dives into the stories that matter.